Welcome. I am Cesar Iliano, BNamericas Content Director. We are days away from the presidential election in Brazil, and we are here with our content team to provide some insights about what might happen this weekend in Latin America's biggest economy. I will be joined by Rogerio Selmayer, our bureau chief for Brazil, João Montenegro, our energy reporter for Brazil, and Pedro Osores, our ICT correspondent. Hello, guys.
Hello, Cesar.
Hi, Cesar.
Hi, Cesar.
Hi. So let's start with Rogerio. Why don't you give us your general view of what to expect in October the 2nd, this weekend? We've been reading some stories this past week. Is there a real chance we have a winner in the first round?
Hello, Cesar. Thanks for the opportunity. Yes, there is indeed a chance of a definition in the first round of the election in Brazil next Sunday on October 2. But this is not the most likely scenario, which remains for a decision just in the second round, as of October 30. According to the most recent surveys here in Brazil, the former leftist president of the country, Mr. Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, is still the front runner ahead of the right-wing incumbent, Mr. Jair Bolsonaro. To be elected in Brazil in the first round, a candidate would need to have 50% plus one of the valid votes. And so far, Lula has a few percentage points below that level. What could benefit Lula in next Sunday during the election day is that there is the possibility of transference of votes from the 38 candidates to his candidacy. However, what is contrary to a definition during the first round would be the level of abstention from votes. According to political analysts in Brazil, in the past election, the abstention levels are higher among low-income voters, which is a segment where Lula has a broad base of support.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. And considering you have been following the business sentiment around the election and in general in the country with the mining and infra sectors, what would you say companies in those two industries should expect with Bolsonaro or Lula at the helm?
Yeah, let me start talking about infrastructure. The point of a major difference in proposals between Lula and Bolsonaro is in relation to the state participation in the economy. While Lula calls for a more active government investments in infrastructure projects, Bolsonaro is advocating for a great private sector participation. Given this fact, under a Lula administration, we will tend to see efforts for an increase in public investment in the area of infrastructure from the government side and also via state-run banks such as BNDES. However, as there are many fiscal restrictions, so this represents a major limit for the expansion of public investment in infrastructure. In case of Bolsonaro victory under a new tenure of Bolsonaro administration, we should see the continuity of a strong agenda of concessions benefiting private sector investments in the infrastructure segment. It's important to underscore that Lula has not shown himself to be a candidate against the concessions agenda. It's worth to remember that in the past governments of the Lula Workers' Party, various infrastructure concessions took place in Brazil. So the bottom line is that in any administration in Brazil, the private sector investment in infrastructure projects will continue to play a key role, at least in the first year of the next administration, of course, with the difference that Lula tried to fuel the public sector investment in infrastructure. Now talking about the mining segment, what makes businessmen more afraid is the possibility of increasing taxes against the sector. Any federal administration that looks to adopt an increase in social programs in the next year may be forced the government to seek additional sources of funds, and this would be through the increase of taxes of some sectors. And the mining segment likely be a sector that can suffer with the increase of taxes. Still talking about the mining sector, it's important to point that businessmen in Brazil are not concerned about any direct intervention in terms of policy, any direct nationalism in terms of the mining segment, regardless who is the next president in Brazil.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rogelio. Joao, let's go to you now. You have been analyzing and writing about the energy sector for many years now. What would you say electric power companies and oil and gas companies should be expecting with one or the other candidate?
Well, Cesar, a new Bolsonaro administration would basically imply a continuation of the current energy policy, consisting of opening up the oil, gas, and electric power markets, and now with the possibility of moving forward with the plans of privatizing Petrobras. This, however, would not be a simple task, as this company embodies a strong sentiment of Brazilian nationalism, and of course, fierce opposition in the National Congress would be expected against any effort on privatizing Petrobras. On the other hand, significant changes could be made by Lula in case he wins the dispute, mostly when it comes to the oil and gas sector. The former Brazilian president would probably work to modify Petrobras' current fuel pricing policy, where prices at its refineries vary following the fluctuation of the international oil barrel price and the exchange rate. So his idea is to basically consider local costs, since Brazil is an oil producer and exporter. At the end of the day, Lula would is likely to change the strategic orientation of Petrobras, which, since Michel Temer's administration, has been carrying out a wide divestment program, selling refineries, thermal power plants, fertilizer plants, and has been focusing on pre-salt exploration and production in order to reduce its debt and provide growing dividends to its shareholders. So we could expect, in case Lula wins, Petrobras to build, for example, new refineries in order to reduce Brazil's exposure to the international variation of the oil price. Meanwhile, the local content policy, which foresees mandatory purchases of domestic goods and services by oil companies, is likely to be strengthened under Lula. In recent years, it has been flexibilized in order to allow oil companies to buy more goods and services abroad. For example, most of Petrobras' new platforms, FPSOs, have been built in China. These changes would certainly generate negative reactions in the market, since they would increase the costs for investors in the country while reducing the profit margin of Petrobras and other oil companies. Regarding the electric power sector, Cesar, Lula would increase social benefits, probably aiming at reduced power rates for low-income consumers and expanding programs such as the Luz para Todos, which is light for all in Portuguese, for example. There are concerns that Lula will try to reverse Eletrobras privatization, but even though he has said that in the past that he could do this, more recently Lula, in private conversations, has indicated that the most the government will do is to try to negotiate with the new owners of the electric power holding some social counterpart to the country. After all, buying back the shares of Eletrobras would be costly and again provoke strong reactions in the market, Cesar.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for your insights. Let's focus now on the technology companies. Pedro, you have been following this sector for more than a decade now with us. And although we know that the technology sector will continue growing, or has always kept on growing with any political party in the government, I'm pretty sure that there might be difference among the businessmen in this sector regarding what to expect with Lula or Bolsonaro.
Thank you, Cesar. That's a great question. Indeed, the ICT sector has some peculiarities when compared to other segments and sectors such as mining or infrastructure, for example. In general, what we have seen in the sector is this organic, latent demand for connectivity, which grows and continues to grow somewhat regardless of any political aspect or political color. And this has been pulling investments in the sector as a whole. even more so since the pandemic, from the infrastructure part with data centers, towers, and fibers, in the services part with the delivery of broadband and content, and in the whole chain in general. Now, having said that, what the telecom sector, for example, specifically has as its main themes on the agenda are basically a tax reform with tax unification, redistribution, and possible end of sectoral fees such as FUST, FUNTEL, and FISTEL, and also a 30-year public policy for digitization. It's curious, I've been covering an event recently, and the CEO of a major infra company on the fiber segment has voiced his concerns that we lack a long-term vision for public policies towards ICT and telecom in Brazil. The Brazilian telecom industry asked in a recent open letter, for example, that the next government creates a specific program of subsidies for broadband access by low-income population, among other issues and things in this letter. They also request deregulation and legal stability for investments, notably those regarding the acquisition of spectrum, and in general, that the rules for those that play in the internet field and those that play in the infrastructure field, such as telcos, be leveled up. Now, if we take as example what was Lula's government and what we have seen under President Bolsonaro, the ICT industry could probably expect a more pro-developmental tone with a greater role of public banks and institutions, inducing certain investments in the sector. With Lula's victories, eventually maybe a new national broadband plan, the PNBL, and on the other hand, a greater effort towards tax cuts and certain rules flexibilization and a more reduced weight from the public sector with a more pro-market tone under Bolsonaro. Now, just to finalize, it's worth noting that we have certain agencies that are autonomous and deal with competition and regulation aspects of the sector, such as Anatel, and the works under Anatel have been continued and did not change significantly ever since Dilma, Temer, or Bolsonaro. So we should expect a general continuity under this specific role of Anatel in general.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, Pedro, Joao, and Rogerio, for your insights. Please do not miss BNamericas coverage in the coming days. We will be publishing, of course, news stories and analysis pieces for you to better understand what might happen in the following months or weeks, depending on what happens in the first round. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Thank you.